The scent of pine and rotting wood had become a comfort. It was the smell of solitude, of safety. In the damp, cramped space of my grandmother's forgotten cottage, perched on the ragged edge of the Shadow Wolf territories, it was the only perfume I knew. Dust motes danced in the single, stubborn shaft of afternoon light that pierced the grimy window pane, and I tracked their movement not with my eyes, but with the subtle shift of warmth on my cheek. My world was one of textures, sounds, and scents, a tapestry woven in darkness. I was Lysandra, an Omega, and I was blind. In our world, a world of predators who valued sight above all else, I was less than nothing, broken, a defective piece of pack life that had been mercifully overlooked for 19 years. But my time of being overlooked was running out. The choosing was in 2 days, a grand, mandatory ceremony where alphas from our pack and neighboring territories would select their mates from the unclaimed. For most, it was a night of hope. For me, it was a death sentence. To be claimed was to be owned, and no alpha wanted broken goods. I would be cast out, left to the mercy of the feral rogues that haunted the forests beyond our borders. My fingers, calloused from years of tracing the world, found the familiar cool weight of the pendant around my neck. It was silver, a heavy, intricate thing my grandmother Alindra had pressed into my hand the day before she died. It was shaped like a closed eye, the eyelid etched with impossibly fine lines, and in the center, where a pupil should be, sat a smooth, milky moonstone. "This will help you see what truly matters, little moon," she had whispered, her voice thin as cobwebs. I hadn't understood then. I still didn't, not really. But the metal held the last vestiges of her scent chamomile and old paper, and it was my only real connection to a past where I was loved, not just pitied. I traced the eyelid, my thumb polishing the moonstone. My own eyes, useless and clouded, were closed. They saw nothing but a hazy, milky gray, like a perpetual fog had settled behind them. The healers had called it a curse, a blight from the moon goddess herself. My mother had simply called it a tragedy, and had faded from my life like a half-remembered dream, leaving me with my grandmother and a vow of silence I never understood. The choosing. The thought sent a tremor through me. I could already smell it in my mind. The cloying mix of perfumes and anxious sweat, the aggressive, territorial musk of powerful alphas, their scents like sharp spikes in the air. I would be herded onto a platform with the other Omegas, a pathetic display of weakness among the vibrant and whole. They would see my clouded eyes, my hesitant steps, and they would turn away in disgust. Or worse, one of the cruel, older alphas, someone like Krathor, whose scent was of stale blood and cruelty, would claim me for sport. The thought made my stomach clench. Hiding was my only option. Here, in this forgotten hovel, I was just a ghost. No one would come looking for the blind girl. A sudden shift in the forest outside broke my reverie. It wasn't a sound, but the absence of it. The constant, gentle chatter of birds, the rustle of squirrels in the dry leaves, the hum of insects, it all ceased at once. An unnatural blanket of silence fell over the woods, so profound it was a pressure against my eardrums. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was not the silence of peace. This was the silence of a predator, a great one. I scrambled to my feet, my hands reaching out, fumbling for the small, crude knife I kept on the rickety table. It was barely sharp enough to cut bread, a pathetic defense, but it was all I had. My breath hitched, lodging in my throat. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, crushing the fallen leaves and twigs with a weight that spoke of immense size and power. Each step was measured, unhurried, the sound of a creature that has never known fear, that has never had to run. With the footsteps came a scent. It sliced through the familiar air of my cottage, utterly alien and overwhelming. It was not just one note, but a chord of them, complex and primal. It smelled of a storm moving over a high mountain pass, the sharp, electric tang of ozone. It smelled of ancient, snow-dusted pine forests, and the cold, clean scent of stone from the deepest parts of the earth. And beneath it all, a dark, wild musk that was purely, terrifyingly male. It was a scent of absolute authority, a scent I had only heard described in hushed, fearful whispers. the Shadow Wolf King. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. King Theron. Why was he here? Kings did not visit the forgotten edges of their territory. They did not seek out broken omegas in derelict shacks. My mind raced. Had my hiding been discovered? Was he here to drag me to the choosing personally? To make an example of me? My fingers tightened on the useless knife, the handle slick with my sweat. Then I heard a second set of footsteps. Lighter, smaller, almost a shuffle, trying to keep pace with the larger strides. A child? It made no sense. The door creaked open. The king's scent flooded the tiny space, so potent it made my head swim. It was like a physical force, pressing in on me, demanding submission. I could feel the sheer scale of him blocking the doorway, a mountain of muscle and dominance casting the entire room into shadow. My useless eyes saw no change in the light, but I felt the coldness of his eclipse. A low rumble, too deep to be a voice, vibrated through the floorboards and up my legs. "You are Lysandra." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, spoken in a voice like grinding stones. I couldn't speak. I could only tremble, brandishing my pathetic knife in the direction of his overwhelming presence. I was a cornered mouse facing a dragon. "Put the knife down," he commanded. The tone was not cruel, but it brooked no argument. It was the voice of a man who had never been disobeyed. But then, a different sound. A small gasp. The child. I heard the soft scuff of a small boot on the floorboards, moving closer. A different scent began to weave through the king's powerful aroma. It was faint, smelling of milk, clean linen, and a heartbreakingly sad, lonely scent, like a room that had been closed for too long. "Kaelin, stay back," the king rumbled, a note of warning or perhaps concern in his deep voice. But the child did not listen. The small footsteps continued until they stopped right in front of me. I felt a tiny, hesitant hand touch my own, the one not holding the knife. The child's fingers were small and cool. They brushed against my skin, then moved to the silver pendant at my throat. I flinched, expecting the king to roar, to pull the child away, to strike me down for being too close to his heir. But he was silent. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. The small fingers traced the shape of the closed eye, settling on the moonstone in the center. I felt a strange, gentle hum from the stone, a warmth I had never felt before, spreading from the point of the child's touch. And then, a voice. Small, clear, and utterly shocking in the tense silence. It was the first word I had heard from anyone but myself in what felt like years. "Mom?" The word hung in the air, a fragile, impossible thing. The child, the king's heir, had spoken, and he had called me Mom. The knife slipped from my nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. The king's scent changed in an instant. The controlled storm of ozone and pine was suddenly shot through with something sharp and volatile. Shock, disbelief, and something else I couldn't name. I stood frozen, the prince's small hand still resting on my pendant. In the space of a single heartbeat, my desperate, lonely world had been shattered. I had hidden from a king, only to have his son find me. I had feared being claimed as worthless, only to be given the most sacred name a child can speak. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any roar. I waited for the king's wrath, for the judgment that was sure to fall. This was not an escape. This was a cage of a different, and far more dangerous, kind. The king did not move for a long moment. I could feel the force of his gaze on me, a physical weight, as if he were trying to dissect me with his eyes alone. The air crackled with his stunned silence. The scent of ozone grew stronger, thick with confusion, and a dawning, sharp-edged suspicion. I could hear the faint, rapid beat of his heart, a powerful thrum beneath the fabric of his tunic. He was as shocked as I was. "Kaelin," he finally said, his voice softer now but strained tight. The child, Kaelin, didn't move. His small fingers were still curled around my pendant, his touch a bizarre anchor in the swirling chaos of my fear. "Kaelin, come here." The boy made a small sound, a soft hum of refusal, and pressed a little closer to me. I could feel the warmth of his small body against my leg. It was terrifying and strangely comforting all at once. I was a stranger, a blind Omega hiding in a hovel, and the Prince of the Shadow Wolves was clinging to me as if I were his only hope. Finally, the king moved. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he took 2 steps into the cottage. He knelt, his presence now at my level, and the intensity of his scent was dizzying. Pine, stone, and that wild, dominant musk, now laced with a raw, paternal anxiety. "Let go of her, son," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my bones. Kalen whimpered, his grip tightening on the pendant. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to protect this small, sad-smelling child. It was madness. Protecting anyone from the Alpha King was like a moth trying to shield a candle from the wind. "It's all right," I whispered, the words rusty in my throat. My voice was thin, reedy. I reached out my free hand slowly, tentatively, toward the child. "It's all right." My fingers brushed against a soft cheek, tear-damp and cool. The boy leaned into my touch, a silent plea. "Who are you?" the king demanded, his voice hardening again. He wasn't speaking to the boy. He was speaking to me. Lysandra," I stammered. "I am no one." "My son has not spoken a word in 2 years," he said, his voice flat, heavy with a grief so profound it was a scent of its own, like cold ash on a winter wind. "Not since his mother's death. He speaks for the first time. To you. A blind Omega hiding from the choosing. You will tell me why." My mind was a blank wall of panic. "I don't know," I breathed, the truth sounding feeble and false even to my own ears. "I swear it. I've never seen him before. I've never seen anyone." The last words came out with a bitterness I couldn't contain. The king was silent again, but I could feel his scrutiny. I imagined his eyes, which were said to shift in color from silver to amber, tracing my face, my useless clouded eyes, the worn fabric of my dress, the pendant that his son was still clutching. "The pendant," he said, his voice sharp. "What is it?" "It was my grandmother's," I whispered. "She gave it to me." He made a sound, not quite a growl, but close, a sound of deep thought. After another eternal moment, he rose to his full towering height. "You are coming with me," he declared. It was not an invitation. It was a royal decree. "No," I gasped, horrified. "Please, I mean no harm. Just leave us, leave me here." "I won't." "You are in no position to refuse." He cut me off, his voice laced with cold iron. "My son has laid a claim on you. A different kind of claim, but one I will not ignore. You will come to the palace. You will remain there, under my watch, until I understand what this is." He paused, and his scent softened fractionally, losing some of its hard edge. "I will not have you harmed. You have my word. You are under my protection." Under his protection. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they sounded like the closing of a cage door. The protection of the Shadow Wolf King was a gilded prison. But what choice did I have? Refusal was death. And then there was the child, Kalen, who was now holding my hand, his small fingers laced with mine. He had not let go of the pendant. He had simply transferred his grip. The journey to the palace was a blur of overwhelming sensations. The King Theron lifted me onto his horse as if I weighed nothing. I was seated in front of him, my back pressed against the solid wall of his chest. His scent enveloped me, a dizzying, potent cloud of authority and power that made it hard to think. One of his arms was a steel band around my waist, holding me securely in the saddle. Kalen was settled in front of me, tucked between my body and the horse's neck, his head resting against my chest. His sad scent was slowly being replaced by something else. Contentment. The palace was not a place, but a sensory explosion. The scent of beeswax, roasting meat, dozens of unfamiliar perfumes, and the underlying musky scent of hundreds of werewolves assaulted me. The sounds were a cacophony, echoing footsteps on stone, murmuring voices that fell silent as we passed, the distant clang of a smith's hammer. I felt the stares of the court like physical touches, hot with curiosity and suspicion. A blind Omega from the fringe, brought to the palace by the king himself, with the silent prince nestled in her arms. The whispers followed us like the rustle of snakes in dry grass. We were not taken to the dungeons or some guest chamber. We were taken directly to the royal wing, a place of unnerving quiet. The air here was different, cleaner, smelling of old stone, wood smoke, and the king's personal scent, which was woven into the very fabric of the place. He led us into a room where a fire crackled, its warmth a welcome caress on my chilled skin. "Morwena!" The king's voice boomed, echoing slightly in the large chamber. A new scent entered the room. It was elegant and complex, like dried lavender, old books, and the sharp, clear scent of wintergreen. It was a scent of age, wisdom, and unshakable authority. The footsteps that accompanied it were soft, dignified. "Theron, what is the meaning of this? The court is in an uproar," a woman's voice said. It was smooth, but held a core of steel. "The Queen Mother." "He spoke," Theron said, his voice tight. "Mother," Kaelin spoke. There was a sharp intake of breath. "What? To whom?" Theron's hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a gesture of presentation. To her, the Queen Mother, Morwena, came closer. Her refined scent enveloped me. I felt her presence before me, studying me just as her son had. I kept my head down, my clouded eyes fixed on the floor. I felt utterly exposed. "Look at me, child," she commanded, her voice firm but not unkind. Slowly, hesitantly, I lifted my head. She was silent for a moment. I heard a soft, rustling sound, like silk, as she leaned closer. "The pendant," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. "By the goddess. Theron, do you see it?" "I see a piece of silver," he said, his skepticism a tangible thing. "No," she insisted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You see a trinket. I see a key. This is the sign of the Moon Speaker." "Moon Speaker?" Theron's voice was dismissive. "A legend, a child's story. Legends are the memories of a people, my son. We have simply forgotten how to read them," Morwena retorted. Her fingers, surprisingly gentle, reached out and touched the pendant. A faint energy, like the hum from Kaelin's touch, resonated through me. The Moon Speakers were seers. They did not see with their eyes, but with their spirit. They were said to be born under a clouded moon, their physical sight sacrificed for a greater one. They could see the flows of life, the truth of a person's soul. They were anchors therein. They could calm the most volatile spirits, soothe the wildest beasts, and stabilize the power of the strongest alphas. I stood, dumbfounded, as she spoke. A moon speaker? Me? The broken, blind girl? It was impossible. It was a fairy tale. "Her blindness," Theron began, the understanding dawning in his voice, "is not a weakness," Morwena finished for him. "It is the mark of her power. It is why she can do what no healer, no beta, not even you, his father, could do. She does not see the trauma that silenced him. She sees only his spirit, pure and hurting, and her presence, it soothes him. It gives him a safe harbor to speak." I looked down at Kaelin, who was now dozing against me, his breathing deep and even. His sad scent was almost gone, replaced by a peaceful, milky warmth. A safe harbor. The words resonated deep within me. Theron was silent for a long time. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its hard, commanding edge. It was replaced by a raw vulnerability that startled me. "The succession is fragile," he said, not to his mother, but to me. "A silent heir is seen as a weak one. My rivals on the council, like Lord Valerius, grow bolder by the day. They whisper that my line is cursed." He took a deep breath, and the scent of cold ash returned. "I need my son back. I need my heir." He stepped closer. I felt his shadow fall over me again, but this time it did not feel threatening. It felt pleading. "I cannot force you," he said, and the words sounded strange on his tongue, as if he had never spoken them before. "The law would allow it, but this is not a matter of law. I am asking you, Lysandra, stay. Stay here, as Kaelin's companion, as his teacher. In return, you will have a home. You will have my unending protection. No one will ever raise a hand to you, or force you into a claiming you do not desire. You will be honored. I give you my oath." He was offering me a choice. A choice. The very concept was so foreign it was like a language I didn't speak. My life had been a series of foregone conclusions. I was blind, therefore I was useless. I was an omega, therefore I was property. Now, this king, this terrifyingly powerful man, was offering me agency. He was offering me a purpose. It was a gilded cage, yes, but my cottage was a cage of rotted wood and fear. This one was a cage of warmth, safety, and purpose. And at its center was a small boy with a sad scent who had called me Mom. My hand, of its own accord, came up to rest on Kalen's small back. I felt the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. I had been hiding my whole life, trying to be invisible, but this child had seen me. In my darkness, he had seen a light. "I will stay," I whispered. The words felt momentous, solid, like stones laid for a new foundation. A long, slow breath escaped the king. The tension in the air eased, the scent of ozone receding, leaving behind the clean, steady fragrance of pine and earth. "Thank you," he said, and the two simple words were filled with a universe of relief. In that moment, he was not the Shadow Wolf King. He was just a father who had been given back a piece of his heart. And I, the blind Omega, was the one who had found it for him. Life in the palace was a disorienting symphony of new sensations. I was given chambers that adjoined the royal nursery and, through a heavy oak door, the king's own suite. The rooms were vast, the ceiling so high that my voice felt small when I spoke. They smelled of lemon oil, old velvet, and the lingering, ever-present scent of the king. A handmaiden was assigned to me, a quiet beta female named Maricela, whose scent was a comforting mix of fresh laundry and chamomile tea. She was kind, describing the layouts of rooms to me in a low voice, guiding my hand to the carvings on the furniture, telling me the colors of the tapestries I could only feel the texture of. Kalen was my constant shadow. His small hand was almost always in mine. He began to speak more, not in long sentences, but in small, precious fragments. "Son," he would say, tugging my hand toward the warmth of a window. "Bird," he'd whisper, when a sparrow sang outside. He never called me Mom again, but he called me Lissa, and the way he said it was a caress. His sad scent was gone completely, replaced by the boisterous, happy smell of a normal little boy. King Theron was a more distant, though no less powerful presence. I would feel his gaze on me during meals in the royal family's private dining hall. I would catch his scent in a corridor and know he had just passed. He spoke to me infrequently, his questions always polite, always focused on Kalen. Did he eat well? Did he sleep through the night? But beneath the formal inquiries, I could sense a roiling current of something else, a deep, unsettling curiosity. I was a puzzle he was still trying to solve, and the intensity of his focus was both unnerving and, to my shame, a little thrilling. The court, however, was not so subtle. I was a freak, a spectacle. The blind seer, they whispered, the name a mixture of awe and mockery. They watched my every move, my every interaction with the prince and the king. The women, in particular, were cruel. Their perfumes were sharp and aggressive, their whispers like the hiss of steam. They saw me as an upstart, a low-born Omega who had somehow bewitched her way into the king's favor. The most venomous of them all was Serilda. Her scent always preceded her, a cloying, artificial fragrance of hothouse roses and something sharp, like bitter almonds. She was the daughter of Lord Valerius, the king's most powerful and ambitious rival on the High Council. Serilda was everything I was not, high-ranking, conventionally beautiful. Maricela had described her as having hair the color of polished gold and eyes like emeralds and dripping with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She had been groomed her entire life to be Theron's queen, a political alliance to unite the old, powerful bloodlines. My presence was a direct threat to her entire future. Our first real confrontation happened during a formal reception in the Great Hall. The cavernous space was a nightmare of chaotic sound and a war of competing scents. I was clinging to Maricela's arm, trying to remain as small and invisible as possible, while Kalen held my other hand. Theron was across the hall, deep in a tense discussion with a group of lords, his powerful scent a distant beacon in the olfactory storm. Well, a silky, contemptuous voice said from directly in front of me. The perfume of bitter roses washed over me. Cyrilda, if it isn't the king's little charity case, I do hope you're not finding the tapestries too overwhelming. The lords and ladies around her tittered. My cheeks burned with humiliation. I felt Kaylin's hand tighten in mine. She is a guest of the crown, Lady Cyrilda, Marisela said, her voice tight but respectful. A guest? Cyrilda's laugh was like the shattering of thin glass. Or a pet? I hear she performs tricks. She made the silent prince speak. What a marvel. Tell me, Omega, can you also fetch? I flinched as if struck. The cruelty was so casual, so profound. Before I could even form a response, a low growl vibrated through the floor. It wasn't from the king. It came from the small boy beside me. Kaylin stepped in front of me, planting his feet. Leave. Her. Alone, he said, his little voice filled with a shocking amount of command, a perfect miniature of his father's authority. The laughter died instantly. There was a collective gasp from the onlookers. Cyrilda's scent soured with shock and fury. To be commanded by a child, and in defense of a blind Omega, was a public humiliation of the highest order. Why, you little... she began, her voice shaking with rage. Is there a problem here? The king's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The crowd parted before him as he strode across the hall. The air grew cold, the scent of ozone crackling around him. He didn't look at Cyrilda. His gaze, I could feel, was fixed on his son, who stood defiant and protective in front of me. Then, I felt his attention shift to me. Lady Cyrilda was just welcoming our guest, Your Majesty. A man's voice, Lord Valerius, his scent of old leather and cold ambition, said smoothly, trying to diffuse the situation. Theron ignored him. He came to a stop beside me, his presence a warm, solid wall. Kaylin, he said, his voice soft. Well done. The praise was quiet, but it rang through the silent hall like a thunderclap. He was endorsing his son's defiance. He was endorsing me. Then he did something that sent a fresh wave of shock through the court. He held out his hand to me. Lysandra, he said, his voice a low rumble for my ears only. The air has grown unpleasant. Walk with me. My hand trembled as I placed it in his. His grasp was warm and firm, his large hand completely enveloping mine. He tucked my hand into the crook of his elbow, and without a word to Cyrilda or her father, turned and led me away. He kept Kaylin on his other side, and the three of us walked through the stunned, silent court as if we were the only people in the world. He was not just protecting me. He was publicly claiming me as his, not as a mate, but as something under his domain, something precious. The message was unmistakable. To insult me was to insult the king himself. As he led me toward the relative quiet of a balcony overlooking the royal gardens, I could still smell Cyrilda's scent behind us, curdled with impotent rage. I had won this battle, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had just started a war. Lord Valerius and his daughter would not forget this humiliation, and their revenge would be far more dangerous than just cruel words. The public display in the great hall shifted something fundamental in the palace atmosphere. The whispers didn't stop, but they changed in tone. The mockery was now tinged with fear. I was no longer just the king's pet. I was a piece on the political board, a symbol of Theron's favor, and therefore, a target. Cyrilda and her father, Lord Valerius, regarded me with a cold, simmering hatred whenever our paths crossed. Their scents were a constant, sour note in the palace air. Theron, for his part, seemed to grow more protective. He insisted I join him, his mother, and Kaylin for every meal. He took to walking with me and Kaylin in the royal gardens in the late afternoons. During these walks, he would speak more, his deep voice a rumbling counterpoint to Kaylin's light chatter. He would describe the flowers, their colors and shapes, his words painting pictures in my mind. He'd place a rose in my hand so I could feel the silken petals and breathe in its perfume. He was trying to share his world with me, and I found myself slowly, tentatively sharing mine with him. I told him how the smooth, cool bark of a birch tree felt different from the rough, furrowed hide of an oak, how the scent of rain on dry earth was one of my favorite smells. During one of these walks, as Kaelin chased a butterfly across the lawn, Theron stopped beside a stone bench. "My wolf is restless," he said, his voice quiet. "It has been since my mate, since Lyra died." The admission was sudden, raw, the scent of cold ash, the smell of his grief, wafted from him. "It does not trust. It sees threats everywhere. The power of my line is ancient, and it is not always placid." I thought of what his mother had said, anchors for the most volatile spirits. "Is that why you brought me here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "To be a leash for your wolf?" He turned, and I felt the full force of his presence as he faced me. "No," he said, his voice a low growl. "I brought you here for my son, but I am beginning to believe my mother's stories. When you are near, there is a quiet. The storm in my blood recedes." He paused. "It is a peace I have not felt in years." His honesty was a physical blow. It left me breathless. He was the most powerful being I had ever known, and he was admitting a weakness, a vulnerability, to me, to the blind Omega. The first true test of my strange, nascent power came a few days later. Lord Valerius, his ambition having finally curdled into open defiance, made his move. It happened on the training grounds, a wide expanse of packed earth that smelled of sweat, steel, and spilled blood. Theron was sparring with his beta, a stern, loyal wolf named Gideon. I was sitting on a bench on the far side of the field with Kaelin and Maricela, listening to the rhythmic clash of practice blades and the grunts of exertion. Lord Valerius arrived with a coterie of his own guards. His scent of cold leather and ambition was sharp, aggressive. "Your Majesty," he called out, his voice dripping with false deference. "Your form is impressive, but a king's true strength is in his control. I have heard whispers that yours wanes." Theron stopped, turning slowly. The good-natured scent of exertion around him vanished, replaced instantly by the crackle of ozone. "Be careful what whispers you give voice to, my lord," Theron warned, his voice dangerously soft. "I merely propose a test," Valerius said, a smirk in his voice. He gestured to one of his men, a huge, scarred alpha whose scent was brutal and rank, like a wolf that had gone half feral. A true spar, not with blunted steel, but with the gifts the goddess gave us. Let your people see that their king's wolf still answers to its master. It was a public challenge, a direct assault on Theron's authority. To refuse would be to admit weakness. To accept was to walk into a trap. I could feel the tension spike across the training ground. Gideon moved to his king's side, growling low in his throat. "I will not be goaded by your ambition." "Valerius," Theron said, his voice flat. "Are you afraid, Theron?" Valerius taunted. "Afraid of what your own people might see? A king who cannot command his own beast?" That was the final straw. A guttural roar ripped from Theron's throat, a sound that was not entirely human. The scent of ozone exploded, becoming the sharp, terrifying smell of a lightning strike. The air grew heavy, charged with raw, uncontrolled power. I felt a wave of primal energy wash over the field, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. "No," I cried out, grabbing for Kaelin, pulling him close. Theron was shifting, but it wasn't the clean, controlled transformation of a master alpha. It was violent, chaotic. I heard the sickening crack of bones reshaping, the tearing of fabric. The guards, even his own, stumbled back, their sense flooding with fear. This was what Valerius had wanted, to provoke Theron into a chaotic shift, to show him as a monster, unfit to rule. The power rolling off Theron was a physical storm. It felt like jagged glass against my senses. I could feel his spirit, his human consciousness, fighting against the overwhelming rage of the ancient wolf within him. He was losing. "Stay back," Gideon yelled at me, moving to form a barrier. But I couldn't. I couldn't just sit there. I felt a pull, a deep, instinctual need to go to him. It was the same protective urge I'd felt for Kaelin, magnified 1,000 times. This was the storm my grandmother had told me I was born to calm. "Lysandra, don't," Maricela pleaded, grabbing my arm. I shook her off. "I have to," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. Pushing myself to my feet, I walked forward, into the tempest. The chaotic energy grew stronger with every step. It was a physical pain, a screaming in my mind. I could see it in my own way, a swirling vortex of black and red rage, with a single, flickering point of silver light, Theron's true self, being swallowed by the darkness. "Theron," I called out, my voice small against the sounds of his pained transformation. He was on his knees, his body contorted, halfway between man and a monstrous wolf creature far larger than any normal werewolf. A low, agonized growl was torn from his throat. Ignoring the shouts of the guards, ignoring the sheer terror that was screaming at me to run, I kept walking until I was standing right before him. I reached out my hand, the one that wore no rings, the one that had only ever known the texture of a lonely world. "Theron," I whispered, and this time, I poured all of my will, all of my being into the word. I didn't touch him. I didn't need to. I reached for that flickering silver light with my mind, with my spirit. I pictured a calm lake, a quiet forest, the feeling of peace his presence had sometimes given me. I offered that peace to him, a silent anchor in his raging sea. The violent energy shuddered. It didn't vanish, but it recoiled, as if it had touched something it couldn't fight. The agonizing sounds of his shift lessened. The scent of lightning and rage began to recede, the clean smell of pine and earth slowly pushing its way back through. I felt him turn his half-wolf, half-human head toward me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt his gaze, no longer wild, but filled with a stunned, profound awareness. He saw me, not with his eyes, but in the way his mother had described. He saw my spirit. Slowly, the transformation reversed. The cracking of bones was more controlled now, reshaping him back into his human form. He collapsed onto the packed earth, breathing in harsh, ragged gasps. The storm was over. The training ground was utterly silent, save for his breathing. I stood trembling, my energy completely spent. The world tilted, and my legs gave out. Before I could fall, strong arms caught me. Gideon. He lowered me gently to the ground. From across the field, I heard Lord Valerius curse, his voice low and venomous. His plan had not only failed, it had backfired, spectacularly. He had meant to reveal Theron as a monster. Instead, he had revealed me as a miracle. Theron pushed himself up, his powerful body shaking with the after-effects of the ordeal. "Get him out of my sight," he rasped, his voice raw. The command was quiet, but it held the weight of absolute death. Valerius's guards hesitated for only a second before they were surrounded by the furious, loyal royal guard. I heard the scuffle of them dragging the sputtering lord and his men away. Then, Theron was before me. He knelt, his scent of pine and earth now mixed with sweat and exhaustion. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and cupped my cheek. His thumb brushed gently across my skin. It wasn't a gesture of a king to a subject. It was something far more personal, more intimate. "Moonspeaker," he breathed, the word no longer a legend, but a reality. "You saved me." I leaned into his touch, too drained to do anything else. I had faced the beast within the king and had not been devoured. In the terrifying quiet of the aftermath, I knew that everything had changed. I was no longer a guest. I was no longer a companion. I was his anchor, and the bond that tied us together was now forged in the heart of his most dangerous fire. In the immediate aftermath, a profound quiet fell over my world. Theron dismissed everyone, his voice regaining its steel. He lifted me from the ground as if I were made of glass, his arms a secure cradle. He didn't hand me off to Gideon or Maricela. He carried me himself, striding from the training grounds, past the stunned onlookers, and back toward the sanctuary of the royal wing. Kalen ran alongside us, his small hand clutching the hem of Theron's tunic, his presence a silent, worried sentinel. He didn't take me to my chambers. He took me to his. He bypassed the grand sitting room and carried me straight into his private study. The room was the very heart of his scent, a concentrated essence of pine, earth, and the crisp, clean smell of old parchment. He placed me gently in a large leather chair that was still warm from his body and smelled intensely of him. The fire was roaring in the hearth, and he knelt before me, his large frame making the grand room feel smaller, more intimate. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and rough with emotion. His hands covered mine where they rested in my lap. They were large, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The echo of his chaotic energy still vibrated within me. It had been like holding back the sea. "What you did out there," he started, then trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "My mother was right. You are what she said you were." He looked down at our joined hands. "Lyra, my first mate. She was killed by a rogue pack during a border inspection. Kaelin was with us. He was only 3. He saw the whole thing. He hid under her body until my guards found him." The confession fell into the quiet room, heavy and terrible. The scent of cold ash, of his deepest grief, filled the air around him. Now I understood the source of Kaelin's sad scent, the reason for his silence. He hadn't just lost his mother. He had been marinated in her death. "The rage," Theron continued, his voice barely a whisper. "It has been my shadow ever since. The wolf inside me wants vengeance, wants blood. Most days I can chain it, but men like Valerius, they know just which links to test." He looked up, and I felt his gaze on my face, intense and searching. "When it broke loose today, I felt myself slipping away, and then I heard your voice. It was a light. In the deepest dark, it was a light." His vulnerability was a raw, open wound. This was the lonely, burdened king, stripped of his crown and his power, showing me the man beneath. A man terrified of his own strength, haunted by his past. A surge of protective instinct, stronger than anything I had ever felt, rose in me. I squeezed his hands. "I wasn't afraid of it," I said, my voice soft but clear. "Of your wolf. I could feel you, underneath it all. You were the one who was afraid." A shudder went through his powerful frame. He lifted one hand and gently, reverently, touched my face. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, my cheekbone, the delicate skin beneath my useless eye. It wasn't a clinical inspection. It was a discovery. He was seeing me, truly seeing me, in the only way he could. "Don't hide from me, Lysandra," he whispered. The command from our first meeting now transformed into a plea. "Not you. I feel as if everyone else in my life sees the crown, or the beast. But you, what do you see?" "I don't see," I reminded him gently. "I feel. And I feel a good man. A king burdened by his duty. A father who loves his son more than his own life." His breath hitched. He leaned in, and his scent filled my senses, intoxicating and warm. His forehead came to rest against mine. We stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, our worlds one of darkness and feeling, the other of sight and power colliding in the quiet space between us. "I am moving you," he said finally, his voice a low rumble against my skin. "Your chambers. You will take the Queen's suite. It adjoins mine and Kaelin's. I need you closer." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't just a command either. It was a statement of need. A need for the peace I brought him. A need for the anchor I provided. I didn't protest. The thought of being farther away from him now felt wrong, like stepping out of the sun and into the cold. From that day on, the dynamic between us shifted irrevocably. The formal distance evaporated. He was a constant presence. He would seek me out in the library, where I spent hours running my fingers over the embossed leather spines of books I could never read, and he would read to me, his deep voice bringing ancient histories and forgotten poems to life. He would take my hand as we walked, his thumb stroking my knuckles in a gesture that was both possessive and tender. The court watched, their whispers now a low, continuous hum of speculation. Cyrilda and her father had been confined to their estates, their plot exposed, but the political instability remained. Other lords and ladies, smelling a shift in power, began to curry my favor, their scents laced with sycophantic sweetness. I hated it. The only presence I craved was Theron's. One evening, a few weeks after the incident on the training grounds, he found me on the balcony outside my new chambers. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the gardens below. A full moon hung in the sky, and though I could not see it, I could feel its gentle, silvery pull, a subtle energy that seemed to resonate with the pendant at my throat. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice soft as he came to stand behind me. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The moon," I whispered. "It feels alive tonight. It is the night of the choosing," he said. My blood ran cold. I had forgotten. In the whirlwind of my new life, the event that I had once feared above all else had completely slipped my mind. My old terror returned, a ghost at the feast. "You have nothing to fear," he said, sensing my sudden anxiety. "You are not among them. You are here, with me." He moved to stand beside me, turning to face me. He took my hand, lifting it to his lips, and pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "Valerius's disgrace has left a power vacuum. The other High Lords are pressuring me to make a choice tonight, to secure the kingdom with a formal alliance, with a queen." My heart sank. Of course. This was politics. This was duty. Cyrilda may be gone, but there were other highborn daughters, other alliances to be made. Our time together, these quiet moments, had been a temporary reprieve, a fantasy. I was a tool, a useful anchor, but not a queen. I was a blind omega. I tried to pull my hand away, to retreat back into the shell I knew so well. "I understand," I said, my voice hollow. "No," he growled, his grip on my hand tightening. "You don't." He used his other hand to cup my chin, tilting my face up toward his. "Look at me." It was a familiar command, but his tone was different. It was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "Lysandra," he said, his voice dropping, becoming rough. "I sent them all away. Every eligible daughter, every political candidate. There is only one choice I will make." My breath caught. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Was it possible? Did I dare to hope? He leaned down, his face now inches from mine. His scent was overwhelming, pine and earth and storm, but now it was laced with something else, something I had only ever smelled on him in fleeting moments. A deep, intoxicating musk of pure, undiluted want, of possession. For years this castle has been a fortress of duty and grief, he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. "You have filled it with light. You have given me back my son. You have given me back to myself. You see me, Lysandra, in a way no one else ever has." His lips brushed against mine, a feather-light touch that sent a bolt of lightning through my entire body. It was tentative, questioning. I leaned into it, a silent answer, a surrender. That was all the encouragement he needed. The kiss deepened, and it was no longer tentative. It was acclaiming. It was the heat of the forge, the force of a tidal wave, the culmination of every shared glance I couldn't see but had felt, every quiet conversation, every moment of shared vulnerability. It was years of loneliness and grief, being poured into a single desperate act of hope. His arm slid around my waist, pulling me hard against the solid wall of his chest, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. When he finally broke the kiss, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his chest heaving. "I do not want an anchor," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not want a moonspeaker. I want a partner. I want a queen. I want you." Tears I didn't know I was holding back slid from my useless eyes, tracing hot paths down my cheeks. He gently wiped them away with his thumb. They were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of overwhelming, impossible joy. "The choosing is about to begin," he said. "The court is waiting for their king to choose a mate." He took my hand, lacing his fingers with mine. "Come with me. Let them see my choice." He led me from the balcony, back into the brightly lit palace. My fear of the ceremony was gone, burned away by the heat of his kiss. I was not being led to my doom. I was walking toward my destiny, hand in hand with my king. The great hall was packed, a suffocating press of bodies and a dizzying cacophony of scents. The air was thick with anticipation, the sharp, musky smells of nervous alphas, and the floral perfumes of hopeful maidens mixing into a heady, anxious fog. At the far end of the hall, On a raised dais sat a single ornate throne, the king's throne, empty. Theron led me not through the main doors, but through a private entrance that opened near the dais. The moment we stepped into the hall, a hush fell. It started near us and spread like a ripple through the crowd, until the entire vast chamber was wrapped in a blanket of stunned silence. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes turning toward us, feel their shock and disbelief like a physical wave. The king had arrived for the choosing, and he was holding the hand of the blind Omega. I clutched his hand tighter, my knuckles white. My old insecurities threatened to swamp me, whispering that I didn't belong here, that I was an imposter in this world of glittering jewels and political machinations. Theron must have sensed my fear. He squeezed my hand, a brief, firm reassurance. "Stay by my side," he murmured, his voice a low anchor in the storm of my anxiety. "Don't hide from me." He led me up the steps of the dais. He did not take his throne. Instead, he stood at its center, turning to face the entire assembly of his people, keeping me at his side. I was acutely aware of my plain dress, a simple wool gown Maricela had helped me choose, amidst a sea of silks and velvets. I was a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. From the front of the crowd, a new scent emerged, sharp and unpleasant, bitter almonds and spite. Cyrilda. I heard a gasp from Maricela, who I knew was standing with the Queen Mother near the dais. Theron had confined Cyrilda to her estate, but he hadn't formally banished her. It seemed she and her father had decided to make one last, desperate gamble. "Your Majesty," Cyrilda's voice rang out, sharp and clear in the silence. It was perfectly pitched, carrying a tone of wounded nobility. "You honor us with your presence. The High Lords and the people are eager to see our kingdom secured, to see you choose a queen worthy of the Shadow Wolf name." She stepped forward, a vision of golden-haired, emerald-eyed perfection, I was sure. She was playing to the crowd, to the traditionalists, reminding them of her high bloodline and her suitability. She was presenting herself as the obvious, logical choice, and me as the foolish, sentimental whim of a grieving king. Theron did not even look at her. His gaze, I felt, swept over the entire hall. His voice, when he spoke, was not the intimate rumble I had come to know. It was the voice of the king, filled with the power and authority that made mountains tremble. "For 2 years, this kingdom has had a king, but it has been without its heart," he began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We have valued strength of arms, purity of bloodline, and sharpness of sight. We have prized the wolf and forgotten the soul." He turned slightly, facing me, though his voice was still for the crowd. He took my other hand, so he was now holding both. "We have been blind," he declared, and a murmur went through the crowd at his choice of words. "We have been blind to true strength. We have mistaken a gift for a curse. We have valued physical sight over clarity of spirit." He lifted my hands, his grip firm and unwavering. "This is Lysandra. You have called her the blind Omega. You have whispered that she is a witch, a charity case. You are wrong. She is a moon speaker, a title not heard in these lands for 500 years. Her sight is greater than any of ours, for she sees the truth of the heart. She sees the path to peace. She calmed the storm in your prince and gave him back his voice." He paused, and his voice dropped, becoming more personal, yet still carrying through the hall. "She calmed the storm in your king, and gave him back his hope." He turned back to the assembly. "The law says I am to choose a mate tonight, a broodmare to secure my line, a political pawn to appease my lords." His voice dripped with contempt for the idea. "I reject this law. I do not choose a mate. I choose a partner. I do not choose an Omega to be claimed. I choose a queen to rule beside me." He released one of my hands and reached for the pendant at my neck. He held the silver eye, the moonstone glowing softly in the torchlight, for all to see. "This is the mark of her lineage, a lineage of wisdom and power that we were foolish enough to forget." Then he looked directly at me. His voice softened, becoming again the voice that was for my ears only. "Lysandra, moonspeaker of the Shadow Wolves, heart of my kingdom, will you be my queen?" The world stopped. The sounds of the hall, the press of the scents, the weight of 1,000 stares it all faded away, leaving only the two of us standing on the dais. He wasn't commanding me. He was asking. He, the Alpha of Alphas, the King of Kings, was giving me the final choice. He had offered me protection, a home, his heart. Now he was offering me a crown. Tears streamed freely down my face, but I was smiling. The girl who had hidden in a dusty cottage, who had considered herself broken and worthless, was being asked to rule. My grandmother's words echoed in my memory. This will help you see what truly matters. And I saw it all with perfect clarity. My place was not in the shadows. It was here, in the light, beside him. Yes, I said, my voice clear and firm, ringing with a strength I never knew I possessed. Yes, Theron, I will. A roar of approval erupted from the hall. It was a deafening, joyous sound. The sense of the crowd changed. The anxiety and suspicion burned away by a wave of celebration and relief. I heard the Queen Mother, Morwenna, let out a soft, triumphant laugh. I smelled the utter defeat from Cyrilda, the scent of her bitter roses turning to ash. Theron smiled, a true, radiant smile that I could feel warming my entire being. He leaned down and kissed me, not with the desperate passion of the balcony, but with a deep, reverent tenderness. It was a kiss of promises, of new beginnings, of two halves becoming whole. It was a king sealing his oath to his queen in front of their entire world. When he pulled back, a small figure darted up the steps of the dais. Kaelin. He threw his arms around my legs, his face pressing into my dress. "Lissa!" he cheered, his voice bright and happy. Theron laughed, a deep, rumbling sound of pure joy. He swept Kaelin up into his arms, settling the boy on his hip. Then he offered me his other hand. Together, the three of us stood before our people, the king, the prince, and the blind Omega who was now their queen. Later that night, long after the celebrations had quieted, Theron led me to the grand balcony adjoining his now our chambers. The full moon was high in the sky, a brilliant silver disk. I could not see its light, but I felt it on my skin, a cool, gentle caress. The air was clean and cold, and the kingdom spread out below us, a tapestry of sleeping towns and dark, ancient forests. Theron wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood in comfortable silence for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night. I was so afraid, I confessed into the quiet. My whole life, I was afraid of what I was, of what I wasn't. "And now?" he asked, his voice a soft vibration against my back. I leaned my head back against his chest, breathing in his familiar, comforting scent of pine and earth. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart. I could feel Kaelin sleeping soundly in his bed just a room away. I could feel the life of the kingdom breathing below us. My world was no longer a small, dark cottage. It was vast, and it was filled with love and purpose. "Now," I said, a smile touching my lips, "I can see everything.